I still remember the exact moment Nathan Blackwell fired me. It was a frigid Monday afternoon in January 2020. The kind where Chicago wind howled against the skyscraper windows and frost patterns formed delicate fractals on the glass while I was reviewing our quarterly client retention report. My desk was meticulously organized, color-coded folders containing 10 years of relationship-building strategies, client meeting notes, and revenue projections that had helped Meridian Consulting become what it was today. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, not waiting for a response before the door swung open. Nathan strode in with calculated casualness, his custom Italian suit perfectly pressed, his posture radiating the distinctive confidence of someone who'd inherited authority rather than earned it. His expression was a carefully arranged mask of corporate regret, practiced but ultimately hollow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca, he said, not sitting down, not even fully entering the room. We need to discuss your position at Meridian. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the January frost outside. After 10 years, a decade of 6 a.m. meetings, missed, family gatherings, and relentless dedication, I recognized the tone. Still, I maintained my composure. I'd navigated enough corporate storms to know when to brace for impact. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. What's on your mind? He remained standing, maintaining the higher ground. The executive committee completed our organizational review yesterday. He paused, examining his manicured fingernails. We're implementing a significant restructuring of the client relations department. The practiced corporate euphemisms weren't lost on me. Restructuring was always code for elimination. 10 years in this industry had taught me the language of polite professional execution. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the sudden hollowness in my chest. And my role in this restructuring? Nathan finally made eye contact, though it didn't reach his eyes. We're consolidating the senior client relations positions. Your portfolio will be distributed among the remaining team. We're prepared to offer a generous severance package. Just like that, 10 years reduced to a generous severance package. No mention of the $218 million in client revenue I'd secured last year alone. No acknowledgement of the countless weekends sacrificed, the relationships cultivated, the trust built with our most valuable clients. May I ask why? I kept my voice level, professional. My department exceeded targets by 27% last quarter. Nathan shifted his weight, the only tell in his otherwise flawless performance. It's not about performance, Rebecca. The company is moving in a direction that requires different leadership energy. We need people who embody Meridian's future vision, more aggressive growth, disruptive strategies. He offered a practiced smile that never warmed his eyes. Your work has been valuable, but we need warriors now, not diplomats. The irony wasn't lost on me. My diplomatic approach had secured and maintained our largest clients, especially Arcadia Global, whose $97 million annual contract represented nearly a third of Meridian's revenue. But Nathan had already made his decision before walking through my door. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. When would you like this transition to take place? HR is preparing your paperwork now. We'll need your building access and company devices by end of day. He glanced at his watch, a subtle but deliberate gesture. Your personal items can be packed now. I've arranged for security to assist if needed. Security, as if I might ransack the place after a decade of building it. I felt something shift. Inside me, not anger, but a strange, powerful clarity. I stood and extended my hand across the desk. That won't be necessary, I said, my voice steady. I appreciate your directness. Nathan looked momentarily thrown by my composure. He'd expected tears, perhaps, or pleading. Instead, I stood tall, hand outstretched, professional to the end. He shook it briefly, awkwardly. "The severance details will be emailed shortly," he said, already backing toward the door. "I wish you the best, Rebecca." The practiced line delivered, he turned and left, not bothering to close my door, my former door, behind him. I stood there for a moment, in the sudden silence, feeling the weight of a decade at Meridian pressing down on me. My eyes moved to the small photo frame on my desk, me standing between Marcus and Elena Young at their daughter's college graduation last summer. Not clients, friends, family almost, after 8 years of working together. The Youngs weren't just the founders of Arcadia Global. They were people who trusted me, who had built their business alongside mine. I carefully placed the photo in my bag, along with a few other personal items. I didn't rush. I moved with purpose, dignity. The office beyond my door was conspicuously quiet, colleagues suddenly finding urgent reasons to be elsewhere. All, except Olivia from the digital marketing team, who caught my eye through the glass wall and offered a small, sad smile of solidarity. As I packed the last of my belongings, a strange sensation replaced the initial shock. Not defeat, but something that felt surprisingly like freedom. Nathan Blackwell had no idea what he'd just done. None of them did. Not yet. Let me take you back to understand why this moment was so significant, and what happened in the months that followed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I joined Meridian Consulting in January 2010, fresh from getting my MBA. The company was growing, but struggling to retain major clients. The financial crisis had made everyone cautious, and trust was a rare commodity in the business world. I started in the client relations department under Thomas Mercer, the founder and then CEO, who believed in a simple philosophy. Business is built on relationships first, transactions second. Thomas became my mentor. Unlike many executives, who treated client relations as glorified sales, he understood the deeper value of genuine connection. "Anyone can make promises to get a signature," he'd say during our weekly meetings. "The real work is delivering on those promises year after year." I embraced this approach, building my client portfolio methodically. While other account managers focused on flashy presentations and aggressive growth targets, I focused on understanding the core needs of each business I worked with. I'd spend weeks learning their operations, meeting staff at all levels, identifying pain points before presenting solutions. By my third year, my client retention rate was 94%, the highest in the company. By year 5, I was managing our top-tier relationships, including the crucial first meetings with Arcadia Global, a mid-sized sustainable technology company that was looking to expand internationally. My first meeting with Marcus and Elena Young, the husband and wife team who had founded Arcadia, was scheduled for 90 minutes. It lasted nearly 5 hours. We connected immediately over a shared vision of how business could operate ethically while still driving growth. They'd been burned by previous consultants who had promised revolutionary strategies but delivered generic templates. "We don't need consultants who tell us what we want to hear," Elena had said, her directness refreshing after months of dancing around egos at other potential client meetings. "We need partners who tell us what we need to hear, even when it's difficult." That honesty became the foundation of our relationship. I never sugarcoated challenges or overpromised results. When an initial market expansion strategy wasn't performing as projected, I was the one who called Marcus at 10 p.m. to recommend pulling back rather than pushing forward, potentially saving them millions in misspent resources. That call, Marcus told me years later at a company dinner, was when we knew Meridian wasn't just another consulting firm. "You put our success above your fee structure. That's when you became family." Within 3 years, Arcadia Global had tripled in size, expanding into 17 international markets with Meridian, with me, guiding their strategy every step of the way. Their annual contract grew from $12 million to nearly $100 million, making them Meridian's largest client by a significant margin. The success should have been celebrated. Instead, it created unexpected friction within Meridian's leadership. As the company grew, Thomas began stepping back from day-to-day operations. New executives were brought in, MBA graduates from prestigious programs with impressive resumes but limited client experience. They brought new methodologies, new metrics, new pressures. Nathan Blackwell arrived in 2018 as the new COO, handpicked by the board to modernize Meridian's approach. He had an impressive track record of aggressive growth at his previous firms and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. His first company-wide address set the tone for what was to come. Meridian has been built on solid foundations, he acknowledged, pacing the stage with practiced precision. But the business landscape has evolved. Client relationships matter, of course, but data-driven strategy and innovative disruption are the future. We need to be bolder, more aggressive, more dynamic in how we approach growth. The subtext was clear. The old ways, Thomas's ways, my ways, were becoming obsolete in Nathan's vision for Meridian. The changes came gradually at first. New reporting structures that prioritized immediate revenue over long-term client satisfaction. Pressure to cross-sell services regardless of client need. Younger, more aggressive account managers were celebrated and promoted, while those of us focused on relationship building were increasingly marginalized. I adapted where I could without compromising my core approach. I learned the new systems, attended the mandatory trainings on disruptive client acquisition strategies, and continued to deliver exceptional results. My client portfolio consistently outperformed targets with the lowest churn rate in the company. But I wouldn't, abandon the principles that had built those successful relationships. When Nathan introduced a new pricing structure that would have significantly increased costs for long-term clients like Arcadia, I pushed back, presenting data showing how the short-term gains would likely lead to long-term losses. "This isn't about metrics, Rebecca," Nathan had said dismissively during one particularly tense executive meeting. "It's about vision and boldness. Sometimes you need to disrupt comfortable relationships to create growth opportunities." "These aren't just comfortable relationships," I countered. "They're the foundation of our revenue stability. Arcadia alone represents 30% of our annual billing." Nathan's smile hadn't reached his eyes. "Perhaps that's the problem. We've become too dependent on legacy clients. Fresh blood brings fresh opportunity." The meeting had ended, with Nathan implementing the new structure anyway. I spent the next week working directly with my clients to mitigate the impact, finding creative solutions within the new framework to protect their interests while still meeting Meridian's targets. It was during this period that Thomas Mercer announced his full retirement. The news hit me hard, though not unexpectedly. He'd been gradually reducing his role for years, but his presence had still provided some balance against the new regime's more aggressive approach. The night before his retirement party, Thomas invited me to dinner at the small Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated my first major client signing years earlier. "I'm worried about the direction of the company," I admitted after we'd ordered. "Nathan's approach feels short-sighted." Thomas nodded, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "Growth is seductive, Rebecca. It's easy to chase, easy to measure, easy to celebrate. Building something that lasts, that's the real challenge." "So you disagree with the board's strategy?" He smiled sadly. "What I think doesn't matter much anymore. But I will say this, the consulting world is cyclical. Firms swing between relationship-focused and transaction-focused approaches every decade or so. The pendulum always returns to center eventually." "That doesn't help the clients caught in the swing," I pointed out. "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He set down his glass and regarded me seriously. "Which is why I've been working on something these past few years. Something to protect what we built." My curiosity piqued. What do you mean? You'll know when the time is right, he said cryptically. Just remember that business, at its core, is about trust. Everything else is just window dressing. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but his words stayed with me, an enigma I couldn't quite unravel. Thomas's retirement marked the beginning of Nathan's unchallenged reign. The transformation of Meridian accelerated. More aggressive targets, more pressure, more emphasis on new acquisitions over client maintenance. The culture shifted from collaborative to competitive. Weekly meetings became performances rather than problem-solving sessions. Still, I maintained my approach with my clients, shielding them as much as possible from the internal changes. I continued to deliver exceptional results, even as the ground beneath me grew increasingly unstable. The first warning sign came when Nathan restructured the client relations department, installing Ethan Barrett, one of his former colleagues from Pinnacle Strategies, as the new director above me, despite my years of experience and superior performance metrics. Ethan brings a fresh perspective, Nathan explained when I questioned the decision. Your technical performance is solid, Rebecca, but leadership requires vision, dynamism, qualities that inspire rather than just execute. The subtext was clear. My approach was becoming inconvenient to Nathan's vision of Meridian's future. I was being systematically sidelined. Still, I persisted. My clients, especially Arcadia, continued to thrive under my guidance. When Marcus and Elena expanded into sustainable energy storage in 2019, creating an entirely new division with projected annual revenue of $300 million, they specifically requested that I lead the consulting team for the launch. We wouldn't consider working with anyone else, Elena told me over dinner the night before the contract signing. You're part of our success story, Rebecca. You've been there through every challenge, every victory. Her words touched me deeply. This was why I had stayed despite the increasing friction with Nathan and his team. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine care, transcended typical client-consultant boundaries. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that Nathan had already been planning my exit for months. The organizational restructuring had been in development since before the holidays, targeted specifically at removing the old guard that still represented Thomas's approach to business. Which brings us back to that January afternoon, standing in my office after being dismissed, feeling strangely liberated rather than defeated. Because Nathan Blackwell, for all his strategic brilliance, had overlooked something crucial, something that would reshape both our futures in ways neither of us could have anticipated. As I rode the elevator down from Meridian's offices for the last time, I didn't feel the crushing defeat many experience after losing a long-term position. Instead, I felt an unusual clarity, a sense of purpose that had been clouded by months of organizational politics. In the lobby, I spotted James from IT, who had always been friendly during our interactions over the years. He approached hesitantly. I heard what happened, he said quietly. It's not right, after everything you've built here. I smiled, genuinely appreciative of his support. Things happen for a reason, James. He glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. Listen, they asked me to immediately revoke your access to all systems, but... He paused. I've given you until midnight, just in case there are any personal files you need from the cloud storage. I thanked him sincerely, though I had already backed up anything personal weeks earlier. The writing had been on the wall for some time. Outside, Chicago's winter wind bit at my face, but I didn't rush to find a taxi. Instead, I walked slowly, letting the cold air clear my thoughts as I considered my next move. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia expressing her shock and support, then another from my former team member, David, similar sentiments. The third message was different, from Marcus Young. Dinner tonight? Just the three of us. El Gaucho, 7 p.m. Important to discuss. I paused on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around me like a human river. How had Marcus already heard about my departure? I hadn't even had time to inform my clients of the transition. I typed back a simple confirmation and continued walking, my mind racing with possibilities. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end of my story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer be constrained by Nathan Blackwell's limited vision of who I was and what I could accomplish. The real story was just beginning, and if you've stayed with me this far, you won't want to miss what happens next, because sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Sometimes being dismissed is exactly what sets you free. And sometimes the people who think they hold all the power discover, too late, that real influence isn't found in corner offices or executive titles. It's built in moments of trust, in promises kept, in relationships that transcend traditional business boundaries. Nathan Blackwell thought he was simply eliminating an outdated approach to client relations. He had no idea that his decision that frigid January afternoon would trigger a series of events that would fundamentally transform Meridian Consulting and his own future in ways none of us could have predicted. During my walk back to my apartment, I reflected on the past decade at Meridian. The countless late nights reviewing strategy documents, the emergency calls from anxious clients, the celebratory champagne when targets were exceeded. I had given everything to that company, my time, my creativity, my unwavering commitment. I had shaped its client approach, built its reputation for integrity. And now, just like that, I was on the outside. By the time I reached my lakefront apartment, I had moved beyond shock to a state of curious anticipation. I had a strange feeling, not of an ending, but of release. Like a bird long accustomed to the limitations of its cage suddenly finding the door left open. I showered and changed, selecting a deep burgundy dress I'd bought in Milan during a business trip with Arcadia's European expansion team. It wasn't a choice made to impress. It was armor of a kind, a reminder of what I had built beyond Meridian's walls. El Gaucho was busy for a Monday night, the warm lighting and rich wood interior providing a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside. Marcus spotted me immediately, rising from a corner table where he sat with Elena. Their greeting was warm, genuine, a stark difference from the careful corporate sympathy I'd received earlier that day. "Rebecca," Elena embraced me tightly. "We heard what happened, that absolute fool." Marcus's greeting was equally warm, but his expression more measured, calculating. Always the strategist, even in moments of personal connection. "Let's order first," he suggested, "before we discuss the reason we asked you here." The meal progressed with deliberate normality. Discussions of their daughter's new research position at MIT, Elena's sustainable housing initiative, the unusually harsh winter. Not until the dessert menus appeared did Marcus finally lean forward, his expression shifting to one I recognized from our most serious strategy sessions. "Thomas called us this morning," he said without preamble. "He told us Meridian let you—" "Garshi," I nodded, taking a sip of water. "Organizational restructuring, apparently." Elena made a dismissive sound. "Corporate speak for, we're making a terrible mistake." Marcus's eyes hadn't left my face. "Thomas also told us about the succession plan, the one he put in place before retiring." I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. "Succession plan?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "He never told you, did he? Typical Thomas, always thinking 3 moves ahead." "I don't understand," I said, setting down my glass. "What succession plan?" Marcus and Elena exchanged a look, the silent communication of partners who had been finishing each other's thoughts for decades. "When Thomas decided to step back from Meridian," Marcus explained, "he was concerned about the company's direction. He saw the board bringing in people like Nathan, growth-focused, but without the relationship foundation that built the firm." Elena continued seamlessly. "He approached us about creating a sort of insurance policy, a way to protect what he'd built and what you'd helped build." My mind raced, trying to connect these fragments to Thomas's cryptic comments at our last dinner. What kind of insurance policy? Marcus leaned forward. Arcadia Global represents nearly a third of Meridian's annual revenue. We're their largest client by a significant margin. I nodded. This wasn't news to me. I'd managed the relationship for years. What you don't know, he continued, is that our contract with Meridian contains a unique clause, one that Thomas and I crafted together. It specifies that our relationship with Meridian is contingent upon specific personnel oversight. Specifically, it names you, Rebecca, as the primary relationship manager. If you are removed from our account for any reason other than your own resignation, Arcadia has the right to terminate the contract without penalty. The implications hit me with physical force. I sat back in my chair, momentarily speechless. Nathan doesn't know, Elena added, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The clause is buried in contract language that only the original signatories would recognize as significant. Thomas ensured it would pass legal review without raising flags. But why? I finally managed. Why would Thomas do this? Because he believed in you, Marcus said simply. Because he knew what we know, that the value you bring isn't just in meeting targets or managing accounts. It's in understanding what businesses like ours truly need, sometimes before we even recognize it ourselves. Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And because he saw what was coming. The push for aggressive growth at the expense of relationship integrity. He wanted to ensure that what he built wouldn't be dismantled by short-term thinking. I sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Thomas had created a failsafe, one that essentially made me indispensable to Meridian's financial stability, whether they recognized it or not. So what happens now? I asked finally. Marcus smiled, the same expression he wore when finalizing a particularly satisfying business deal. That, Rebecca, is entirely up to you. Meridian has violated the terms of our agreement by removing you. We can terminate our contract tomorrow if we choose. $97 million gone, Elena added, plus the new energy storage division contract that hasn't been finalized yet. Another $40 million annually. The power of this information was dizzying. With a single decision, I could potentially cripple Meridian's financial projections for the year. Nathan's restructuring would suddenly look like catastrophic leadership failure. Or, Marcus continued, watching me closely, we could propose an alternative arrangement, one that better serves everyone's interests. I sat in the restaurant booth, feeling the weight of Marcus's words. An alternative arrangement. The power to decide Meridian's fate, and by extension Nathan's, rested in my hands. It was a dizzying revelation after a day that had begun with my professional execution. What kind of alternative arrangement? I asked, my mind already racing with possibilities. Marcus leaned forward, his voice lowered, though the restaurant's ambient noise ensured our privacy. We've been discussing this possibility since Thomas first warned us about the company's changing direction. Arcadia has grown significantly over the past 5 years. Our needs have evolved. The consulting model that served us well during expansion may not be optimal moving forward. Elena nodded. We need more than periodic strategic guidance now. We need consistent, dedicated expertise, someone who understands our company from the inside out, who shares our values and vision. I began to see where this was heading. You want to bring the consulting function in-house? Not exactly, Marcus replied with a smile. We want to create a new kind of partnership, a boutique strategic consultancy designed specifically for companies like Arcadia, growth-focused but values-driven, companies that need more than quarterly PowerPoints and generic frameworks. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek folder, sliding it across the table to me. We'd like you to lead it. I opened the folder to find preliminary business plans for a new consultancy, Ascend Partners. The structure was elegant, focused on deep engagement with a select group of clients rather than the traditional model of maximizing billable hours across a broad portfolio. You'd have controlling interest, Marcus explained. We'd be your anchor client, with a 5-year guaranteed contract that exceeds our current Meridian commitment. We've already identified 7 other potential clients who share our philosophy. Businesses that want consultants who truly understand their operations, not just ones who deliver presentations and disappear. I paged through the detailed projections, the carefully constructed organizational charts, the mission statement that could have been written by my own hand. How long have you been planning this? Seriously? About 6 months, Elena admitted. But the idea has been forming ever since Thomas first shared his concerns about Meridian's new direction. We knew eventually there would be a breaking point. And if I hadn't been fired today? Marcus and Elena exchanged another of their silent communications. We believed in your vision for client relationships, not Meridian's, Marcus said. Sooner or later, we would have approached you. Nathan simply accelerated our timeline. I closed the folder, my thoughts swirling. Just hours ago, I had been unceremoniously dismissed, my decade of work dismissed as obsolete. Now I was being offered the chance to build something aligned with my deepest professional values, backed by one of the most successful sustainable technology companies in the market. What about the clause in Meridian's contract? I asked. If I leave to start a competing firm, wouldn't that nullify the protection Thomas built in? The clause specifies removal, not resignation, Elena clarified. You were removed. The contract can be terminated without penalty, regardless of your next steps. The implications were clear. I could walk away from Meridian cleanly, take Arcadia's business with me, and launch a venture built on everything I believed in. Or I could use the leverage to return to Meridian on my own terms, perhaps even negotiate Nathan's removal. I need some time to think, I said finally. Marcus nodded. Of course, but don't take too long. Nathan won't remain in the dark about the contract clause forever. Once legal reviews the situation, the dynamics will shift. We finished our dinner with lighter conversation, but my mind was elsewhere, racing through possibilities, weighing options, formulating plans. By the time I returned to my apartment that night, the shock of being fired had been replaced by a sense of charged anticipation. I spent hours at my desk, reviewing the proposal, adding notes, refining projections. Around 2 a.m., I took a break, walking to my window to gaze out at Chicago's glittering skyline. The buildings stood like sentinels against the night sky, monuments to ambition and vision. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. You okay? Team's in shock. Nathan announced your departure in afternoon meeting. Ethan already moved into your office. Vultures didn't waste time. I smiled at her loyalty, but didn't reply immediately. Instead, I turned back to my desk where the Ascend Partners folder lay open. Next to it sat my Meridian termination paperwork, still unsigned. 2 paths stretched before me. Return and fight for my place at Meridian, using the Arcadia contract as leverage, or step away entirely to build something new, something truly mine? The answer crystallized with surprising clarity. Fighting. To return to Meridian meant battling the same forces that had dismissed me in the first place. Even with leverage, I'd be swimming against the current of Nathan's vision. Why struggle to preserve a place within someone else's flawed structure when I could build something better from the ground up? I picked up my phone and typed a response to Olivia. I'm better than okay. Sometimes the greatest gift is being set free. Coffee tomorrow? I have something to discuss. Then I texted Marcus. I'm in. Let's build something extraordinary. His reply came seconds later, despite the late hour. We never doubted you for a moment. I slept better that night than I had in months, perhaps years. The weight of trying to preserve Thomas's vision within an increasingly hostile environment had been lifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt the exhilaration of possibility rather than the burden of resistance. The next morning, I signed my termination papers and returned them to Meridian's HR department via courier. I didn't contest the terms or negotiate for better severance. Some battles aren't worth fighting when you're focused on winning the war. I met Olivia at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from Meridian's offices. Her expression when I outlined my plans shifted from concern to excitement. "They have no idea what they've done, do they?" she said, shaking her head in amazement. "Nathan sees only what he wants to see," I replied. "He's so focused on his vision of corporate dominance that he's blind to the actual foundation of client relationships." She stirred her latte thoughtfully. "What happens when Arcadia terminates their contract? The whole client relations department will implode." I considered this. Many of my former colleagues, good people who believed in relationship building, over transaction-focused consulting, would suffer from the fallout. "That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you," I said. "I'm not just taking Arcadia with me. I'm building a new model, one that honors the work we believe in, and I'll need a strong digital strategy lead." Her eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "Not just a job, a partnership. Smaller equity stake than mine, but real ownership. You've always understood that digital strategy should serve relationship building, not replace it." She didn't hesitate. "When do we start?" Over the next week, I operated with quiet efficiency. I signed the formal agreements with Marcus and Elena, securing Arcadia as Ascend Partners' founding client. I leased a small but elegant office space in Chicago's West Loop, not the gleaming downtown skyscraper that housed Meridian, but a renovated industrial space with character and warmth. I reached out selectively to former colleagues who shared my philosophy, not actively poaching, but letting them know opportunities would be available once my non-compete period ended. I connected with Thomas, who expressed nothing but support for my new venture. "I always hoped you'd take this path eventually," he told me during a long phone call. Though I didn't anticipate Nathan expediting the process quite so dramatically. "You could have told me about the clause in Arcadia's contract," I pointed out. He chuckled. "Would you have believed in yourself as completely if you'd known? There was a safety net. Some things we must discover through challenge, Rebecca." 10 days after my termination, while I was setting up my new office with Olivia, my phone rang. Nathan Blackwell's name flashed on the screen. I showed Olivia, who raised her eyebrows in silent question. I nodded and answered on speaker. "Rebecca." His voice carried none of the dismissive confidence from our last encounter. "I think we need to discuss an important matter regarding Arcadia Global." "Hello, Nathan. I'm rather busy at the moment. Perhaps you could be more specific." Pause. Our legal team has identified some unusual language in the Arcadia contract. I think it would be in everyone's best interest to discuss this in person. I'm no longer a Meridian employee, Nathan. Any contract discussions should happen with your client relations team. I kept my tone neutral, professional. "This matter concerns you directly." His voice tightened with controlled frustration. "The contract contains a clause specifically naming you as essential to our service agreement." "Yes, I'm aware of that clause." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke, Nathan's call was just the beginning. 1 month after launching. Ascend Partners. I was preparing for our weekly leadership meeting when my assistant, Jamie, knocked on my office door. "Rebecca, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's rather insistent." Jamie's expression conveyed both amusement and uncertainty. "Says her name is Victoria Blackwell." I paused, the name registering immediately. Victoria Blackwell, Nathan's wife and a formidable corporate attorney known for her sharp negotiation tactics. What could she possibly want? Send her in, I said, straightening the papers on my desk. I had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Victoria entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Elegant in a tailored charcoal suit, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, she carried herself with the composed dignity of a seasoned professional. Ms. Jensen, she began, extending her hand. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I appreciate your time. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. How can I help you? She sat, studying me with analytical precision. I'll be direct. Nathan doesn't know I'm here. In fact, he would be furious if he knew. That caught me by surprise. Then why are you here? She smiled slightly. Because sometimes men in positions of power develop blind spots, particularly when their egos are involved. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Meridian is imploding, she said matter-of-factly. Not just because of Arcadia's departure, though that was the catalyst. The underlying problem is more fundamental. Nathan dismantled the relationship-based approach that made the company successful in the first place. I'm aware of Meridian's challenges, I said carefully, but I'm not sure why you're bringing this to me. Victoria reached into her briefcase and removed a slim folder. Nathan believes the solution is doubling down on his strategy. More aggressive, acquisition tactics, more pressure on the remaining clients, more emphasis on short-term gains to offset the losses. She slid the folder across my desk. This is the restructuring plan he'll present to the board next week. I glanced at the document without opening it. Why are you sharing this with me? Her expression softened slightly. Because it will fail. And when it does, Meridian won't just lose more clients, it will lose its soul. And despite what you might think, I care about that company. I care about the hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on it. I opened the folder, scanning. The executive summary? The plan was exactly as Victoria had described, a doubling down on the very approach that had driven away Arcadia and the other clients who had followed them to Ascend. Again, I said, closing the folder. Why bring this to me? Victoria leaned forward. Because you understand what Nathan doesn't, that sustainable business is built on relationships, not transactions. And because I think there's a better path forward than watching these two companies destroy each other. We're not trying to destroy Meridian, I clarified. We're building something different. I know, and that's precisely why I'm here. She took a deep breath. I'm proposing a collaboration rather than competition. Not a merger. Both companies maintain independence, but a strategic alliance. Meridian needs to relearn what made it successful, and Ascend could benefit from Meridian's scale and established infrastructure. The suggestion was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. A partnership between Ascend and Meridian? The company that had fired me working alongside the company I had built in response? Nathan would never agree to this, I said finally. Victoria's smile was knowing. Nathan won't be making that decision. The board meeting next week isn't just about the restructuring plan. It's about leadership. There's already a motion to replace him as CEO. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. And who do they have in mind as his replacement? Me. Her gaze was unwavering. I've been asked to step in as interim CEO while they conduct a proper search. And my first priority would be repairing the damage, starting with exploring this potential alliance. I sat back, taking in the implications. Why not just adopt our approach at Meridian? Why involve Ascend at all? Because authenticity can't be copied, she replied simply. You've built something genuine here, something that embodies the principles Thomas established. Meridian could try to imitate that, but it would be hollow. Real transformation requires collaboration with those who truly understand and believe in the vision. I considered her words carefully. A partnership with Meridian under new leadership could accelerate Ascend's growth while helping to preserve the livelihoods of hundreds of Meridian employees who had been caught in the crossfire of Nathan's failed strategy. I'd need to discuss this with my team, I said finally. This isn't just my decision. Victoria nodded, standing to leave. I understand. The board meets on Friday. If you're open to discussions, let me know before then. She handed me her business card. My personal cell is on the back. This conversation never happened. After she left, I remained at my desk, Victoria's proposal spinning through my mind. The irony wasn't lost on me, the wife of the man who had fired me now seeking my help to save the company he was destroying. It would have been easy to dismiss the idea outright, to focus solely on Ascend's growth while watching Meridian struggle. But that approach contradicted everything I believed about business and leadership. This wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about building something meaningful, something that served clients and employees alike with integrity. I called Marcus and Elena that evening, sharing the unexpected visit and proposal. Their reaction was measured. It's an interesting possibility, Marcus acknowledged. Victoria Blackwell has a sterling reputation, nothing like Nathan's approach to business. But can you trust this isn't some elaborate ploy? Elena asked, always the more cautious of the two. Nathan discovering you control their biggest client was humiliating for him. This could be an attempt to regain ground. I considered that, I admitted. But it doesn't make sense. Victoria has too much to lose professionally by engaging in those kinds of tactics. And from what I've heard through industry channels, Meridian's situation is exactly as dire as she described. What does your gut tell you? Marcus asked. I thought about it, trying to separate my emotional response from my business judgment. That this is a genuine opportunity to create something better than either company could build alone. And that sometimes, the path to greatest impact isn't the one we initially imagined. The following morning, I gathered our leadership team, now expanded to 6 executives including Olivia and David from Meridian, along with new hires who shared our vision. I shared Victoria's visit and proposal, watching their reactions carefully. A partnership with Meridian? David looked skeptical. The same company that fired 3 of us sitting at this table? Not the same company, I clarified. A different leadership with a different vision, one aligned with our approach to client relationships. Olivia, always quick to see strategic opportunities, was already considering the possibilities. It would give us immediate scale and access to client sectors we haven't penetrated yet. But would it dilute what makes us special? Asked Sarah, our operations lead who had joined from outside the Meridian orbit. Our clients come to us because we're different. It was a fair concern, one I had wrestled with myself. That's why this wouldn't be a merger. We'd maintain Ascend's identity and approach while helping Meridian rediscover their roots. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, examining every angle, every risk, every potential benefit. It wasn't just a business decision. It was about the future we wanted to build. Here's what I propose, I said finally. We agree to preliminary discussions with clear parameters about maintaining Ascend's independence and approach. We listen to exactly what Victoria and the board have in mind, and we make no commitments until we've had time to evaluate a concrete proposal. The team nodded in agreement. This measured approach honored both opportunity and caution. I called Victoria that afternoon. We're open to discussions, I told her. No promises, but we're willing to listen. That's all I'm asking for now, she replied, relief evident in her voice. I'll update you after Friday's board meeting. The next day brought another unexpected visitor to Ascend's offices. Thomas Mercer himself appeared in our reception area, casually dressed and carrying a small wrapped package. Just wanted to see what you've built, he explained with a warm smile as I welcomed him into my office. Impressive space. Feels alive, purposeful. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by his visit. "It's coming together faster than I anticipated." He nodded, glancing around at the open workspace visible through my glass office walls. "Victoria Blackwell reached out to me yesterday," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Wanted my thoughts on Meridian's situation and her proposed solution." I wasn't entirely surprised. Thomas remained respected throughout the industry. His opinion still carried weight, especially with Meridian's board. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. "That collaboration often creates more value than conquest," he smiled. "And that you would make the right decision, whatever that might." I'm still not sure what the right decision is," I admitted. Thomas placed the small package on my desk. "This might help." I unwrapped it to find a beautifully crafted compass, its brass casing polished to a warm glow, the words, "True North," engraved on the back. "Leadership isn't about always knowing the exact path," Thomas said. "It's about maintaining a clear sense of direction, your true north, while adapting to changing landscapes. I've always believed your true north was building meaningful business, relationships, not just successful ones." His words resonated deeply, clarifying something I had been feeling, but couldn't quite articulate. "A partnership with Meridian wasn't what I envisioned when I started Ascend," I acknowledged. "The best journeys rarely follow our initial maps," he replied with a gentle smile. "What matters is whether the unexpected turns bring us closer to, or further from our deepest values." After Thomas left, I sat holding the compass, its weight solid and reassuring in my palm. The needle pointed steadily north, unaffected by external forces or personal doubts. There was wisdom in that consistency, that clarity of purpose. Friday arrived, and with it, Victoria's promised update. Her text was brief. "Board-approved leadership. Change. Meeting scheduled Monday to discuss potential partnership. We'll call with details." The news spread quickly through Chicago's business community. By Friday afternoon, industry publications were reporting Nathan Blackwell's removal as CEO of Meridian Consulting, with Victoria named as interim replacement. The articles cited strategic differences and a return to core values as the reasons for the change. I received no fewer than 12 messages from former Meridian colleagues that day, ranging from shocked to jubilant. Nathan's leadership style had created many casualties beyond just me. Monday's meeting was set for neutral territory, a private dining room at the Chicago Club, with just 4 attendees, Victoria and the board chair representing Meridian, Marcus and myself representing Ascend. Victoria laid out her vision with characteristic precision. "We're proposing a strategic alliance, not an acquisition or merger. Both companies maintain their independence and identity, but we create structured collaboration in 3 key areas." She outlined a framework for shared resources, complementary client engagement, and joint talent development. Meridian brings scale, established infrastructure, and global reach. Ascend brings relationship-centered methodology, agility, and authenticity. Together, we offer something unique in the market, enterprise-level capacity with boutique-level personalization. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And the operational structure? How would decisions be made where our interests intersect?" "A joint steering committee," Victoria proposed. "Equal representation, consensus-based decisions for collaborative initiatives, while each company maintains complete autonomy in its core business." The proposal was thoughtful, balanced, and potentially transformative for both organizations. It would accelerate Ascend's growth trajectory while helping Meridian return to the relationship-focused approach that had built its original success. But one question remained unaddressed. "And Nathan?" I asked. "What's his role in this new structure?" Victoria's expression remained professional, but I detected a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. "Nathan has been offered a position leading our Asia-Pacific expansion. It would remove him from day-to-day operations in Chicago while allowing him to save face externally. And if this partnership proceeds, I pressed, would he be involved in any collaborative initiatives between our companies? No, Victoria said firmly. That's a non-negotiable condition from our side as well. This partnership requires a clean break from the approach he championed. By meeting's end, we had agreed to a framework for continued discussions and a timeline for developing a formal proposal. Nothing was finalized, but the path forward was clearer than it had been. Days earlier, as we were gathering our things to leave, Victoria asked for a moment alone with me. Once the others had stepped out, she spoke with unexpected candor. I need you to know something, Rebecca. I opposed Nathan's decision to terminate you. I told him it was short-sighted and potentially catastrophic for client relationships. Her professional demeanor softened slightly. But I also failed to stop it. For that, I apologize. Her acknowledgement caught me off guard. You couldn't have changed his mind. Perhaps not. But I could have fought harder. She met my gaze directly. I want you to understand that this proposed partnership isn't just strategic. It's an acknowledgement that your approach was right all along. The board knows it. I know it. And deep down, even Nathan knows it, though he'll never admit it publicly. As I drove back to Ascend's offices after the meeting, Victoria's words echoed in my mind. Your approach was right all along. There was no triumph in the acknowledgement, no sense of vindication, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that principles I had always believed in were being recognized for their true value. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Teams from both companies met to explore potential collaboration models, examining everything from client portfolio overlap to technology integration possibilities. We established strict confidentiality protocols. Nothing would be announced until we had a fully developed framework that both organizations could embrace with confidence. Throughout this process, I maintained constant communication with Ascend's team, ensuring everyone understood that our identity and approach would remain intact regardless of the partnership structure. This wasn't about being absorbed into Meridian. It was about amplifying our impact through strategic collaboration. 3 weeks after the initial meeting, we had developed a comprehensive proposal for what we were now calling the Bridge Initiative, a structured alliance that would leverage the strengths of both organizations while respecting their separate identities. The night before our final decision meeting, I found myself working late at the office, reviewing the proposal one last time. The space was quiet, most of the team having left hours earlier. In the stillness, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had sat stunned in my Meridian office as Nathan terminated my position after a decade of service. That moment, painful as it was, had set in motion a series of events that led not just to Ascend's creation, but to this unexpected opportunity to reshape 2 organizations representing hundreds of employees and dozens of client relationships. Had Nathan not fired me, Ascend might never have existed. Had Thomas not inserted that clause in Arcadia's contract, I might never have discovered the leverage that catalyzed my independence. Had Victoria not recognized the fundamental flaws in Nathan's approach, Meridian might have continued its downward spiral. Each setback, each challenge, each unexpected turn had been necessary to arrive at this moment of possibility. My reflection was interrupted by a text from Elena. Whatever you decide tomorrow, remember that sometimes our greatest contributions come from places we never planned to go. Her timing was uncanny, as though she had sensed my contemplative mood. Her words resonated with Thomas's earlier wisdom about true north, about maintaining clarity of purpose while adapting to changing landscapes. The next morning, our leadership team gathered one final time to make our decision. The discussion was thoughtful, measured, each person weighing the opportunities and risks from their perspective. This isn't what we envisioned when we started. Ascend, I acknowledged. But perhaps it's something better, a chance to influence not just our own path, but the direction of an entire industry, to show that relationship-centered business isn't just a boutique approach, but a viable model at enterprise scale. One by one, the team members shared their perspectives. There were concerns, questions, and conditions, but by discussion's end, a clear consensus had emerged. We would proceed with the Bridge Initiative with specific guardrails to protect Ascend's culture and approach. That afternoon, Marcus and I met with Victoria and Meridian's board chair to finalize the agreement. The terms were balanced, the governance structure equitable, the vision aligned with values I had championed throughout my career. As we signed the documents, Victoria offered her hand. "This is how business should be done," she said quietly. "Not as a zero-sum game, but as a collaborative journey where different strengths create something greater than the sum of their parts." The formal announcement was scheduled for the following week, after both organizations had time to communicate the partnership internally. The night before the public announcement, I hosted a gathering for the entire Ascend team at a rooftop venue overlooking Chicago's skyline. "Tomorrow, a new chapter begins," I told them, raising a glass as the setting sun bathed the city in golden light. "But before we step into that future, I want to honor the journey that brought us here." I looked around at these people who had taken a leap of faith with me, some from Meridian, others new to our vision, all committed to building something meaningful together. 6 months ago, I sat in an office much like yours, being told that my approach to client relationships was outdated, that my leadership lacked the necessary energy for today's market. Today, that same approach is being recognized as the foundation for an entirely new model of consulting. Olivia stepped forward, raising her glass. "To Rebecca, who showed us that composure isn't weakness, that relationship building isn't soft, and that sometimes the quietest voice in the room has the most powerful vision." The team's applause warmed me deeply, but I shook my head. This isn't about me. It's about an idea. That business at its best isn't just transaction, it's transformation. That the measure of success isn't just what we achieve, but how we achieve it. I gestured toward the city spread before us, lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. "Tomorrow, we don't just announce a partnership. We declare a philosophy. That sustainable success comes from depth, not just speed. From understanding, not just execution. From connection, not just competition." I thought of Nathan then, halfway across the world in Meridian's Asia-Pacific office, perhaps still believing that his approach had been right despite the market's verdict to the contrary. I felt no animosity, only a hope that he too might eventually discover what I had learned through this journey, that our greatest professional strength often lies in the very qualities others mistake as weakness. "When I was fired 6 months ago," I continued, "it felt like the end of something important. Now I understand it was just the beginning of something essential. Not just for us, but for every client we serve, every employee we mentor, every relationship we build." David raised his glass higher, to beginnings disguised as endings. The team echoed his toast, glasses catching the last light of day as darkness settled over the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complexities, new opportunities to prove the value of our approach. But tonight was for celebration, not of victory over adversity, but of transformation through it. The public announcement the following day created waves throughout the consulting industry. Business publications analyzed the unprecedented partnership structure, with headlines ranging from skeptical, "Can competitor collaboration work in cutthroat consulting?" to intrigued, "Relationship revolution, how two rivals are rewriting business partnership rules." Clients responded with overwhelming positivity. Many had worked with both firms at different points and saw the strategic logic in combining Meridian's scale with Ascend's relationship-focused methodology. In the weeks that followed, we began implementing the Bridge Initiative's first collaborative projects. The integration wasn't without challenges. Different systems, different cultures, different expectations all required careful navigation. But the fundamental alignment around relationship-centered business provided a strong foundation for working through these complexities. 2 months after the announcement, I received an unexpected email from Nathan Blackwell. I opened it with curiosity rather than apprehension. "Rebecca," it began, "you've no doubt heard I've resigned from Meridian to pursue independent opportunities. Before moving on completely, I wanted to acknowledge something that's taken me too long to recognize." The email continued with surprising candor. "You were right about client relationships being the foundation of sustainable growth. I mistook your methodical approach for hesitation, your relationship focus for lack of strategic vision. The market has proven otherwise, decisively." I sat with his words, appreciating the humility they represented. Leadership isn't about never being wrong. It's about having the courage to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. His email concluded, "The partnership you've structured with Victoria is genuinely innovative. It challenges assumptions about how consulting firms compete and collaborate. While I won't be part of its evolution, I'll be watching with professional interest and personal respect for what you've accomplished." I wrote a brief but sincere reply, wishing him well in his future endeavors and acknowledging his role in the chain of events that had ultimately led to the Bridge Initiative. Sometimes our greatest catalysts come from unexpected sources, even from those who underestimate us. 6 months to the day after Nathan had fired me, I stood addressing a combined gathering of Ascend and Meridian team members in Meridian's main conference center. The space that had once felt cold and intimidating now hummed with collaborative energy. When I walked out of this building with my personal belongings in a cardboard box, I couldn't have imagined standing here today. I began, looking out at the faces before me. Some familiar from my Meridian days, others new colleagues from Ascend, all now partners in this unprecedented alliance. But that moment of professional rejection contained the seeds of something much more important than personal vindication. It created space for us to reimagine not just how we work together, but how business itself can function when relationship depth is valued as highly as transaction speed. Victoria, now confirmed as Meridian's permanent CEO, nodded from her seat in the front row. Our partnership had evolved from strategic necessity to genuine collaboration, our different leadership styles complementing, rather than competing with, each other. The true measure of leadership isn't how we respond when everything goes according to plan, I continued. It's how we transform challenge into opportunity, how we maintain our core values while adapting to changing circumstances, and how we create value not just for ourselves but for everyone our decisions touch. I thought about the compass Thomas had given me, now sitting on my desk at Ascend as a daily reminder of the importance of true north. The path had taken unexpected turns, but the direction, relationship-centered business built on trust and genuine value creation, had remained constant throughout. 6 months ago, I lost a job, I concluded. But in that loss, I found something far more valuable: the chance to build something authentic, the opportunity to demonstrate the market value of relationship-centered business, and the privilege of working with people who believe, as I do, that how we succeed matters as much as whether we succeed. As I looked out at the faces before me, engaged, purposeful, committed to our shared vision, I realized that Nathan's decision to fire me had been the catalyst for my most important professional contribution. Not because it had led to personal vindication, but because it had created space for something truly transformative to emerge. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift we can receive. Sometimes losing what we thought we needed opens the door to what we were meant to create. And sometimes, the moments that feel like professional endings are actually just the first step in a much more meaningful beginning. 3 years after that fateful January day when Nathan Blackwell fired me, I stood on the main stage at the Global Business Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The cavernous hall was filled to capacity: CEOs, government leaders, nonprofit executives, and social entrepreneurs all gathered to hear about what the business press had dubbed the relationship revolution. Traditional business thinking views relationships as a means to transactions, I explained to the attentive audience. The relationship revolution inverts that premise entirely. It recognizes that transactions are merely moments within relationships, not their purpose. When we understand this distinction, everything changes, from how we measure success to how we structure organizations. From my vantage point on stage, I could see faces that represented the remarkable journey of the past 3 years. Marcus and Elena sat in the front row, the original believers in this approach. Victoria was there representing Meridian, our partnership having evolved into something even more transformative than we'd initially imagined. Thomas Mercer, now well into his 70s but still sharp as ever, nodded approvingly as I articulated principles he had embodied throughout his career. Most meaningfully, interspersed throughout the audience were hundreds of leaders from organizations that had adopted our relationship-centered methodology. The Ascend Academy, initially conceived as a modest training program, had evolved into a global movement with over 4,000 certified practitioners across 53 countries. The proof is in the results, I continued, advancing to a slide showing comparative metrics. Organizations implementing relationship-centered business principles have demonstrated 43% higher client retention, 37% lower employee turnover, and 28% better long-term financial performance compared to transaction-focused competitors in the same sectors. The data told a compelling story, but the human impact was even more powerful. I invited 3 leaders to join me on stage: the CEO of a healthcare network, the founder of a technology platform, and the executive director of an international development organization. Each shared how relationship-centered principles had transformed not just their operational results, but the fundamental purpose and impact of their work. The most significant shift, explained Dr. Amara Okafor, the healthcare CEO, wasn't in our processes, but in our perspective. When we truly internalized that relationships aren't just the context for healthcare delivery, but its essence, everything from diagnostic approaches to treatment protocols evolved. Patient outcomes improved dramatically when relationship depth became our primary metric rather than just an incidental factor. As the panel discussion unfolded, I reflected on the extraordinary path that had led to this moment. 3 years earlier, I had been packing personal belongings into a cardboard box, my decade of work at Meridian dismissed as outdated and irrelevant. Now I was addressing global leaders about an approach to business that was revolutionizing industries. From healthcare to finance, from technology to education, the journey hadn't been linear or without challenges. The Bridge Initiative's success had created both opportunities and complications as it expanded. Some within Meridian's traditional hierarchy had resisted the cultural changes required by relationship-centered business. Others at Ascend had worried about maintaining our distinctive identity as the partnership evolved. Navigating these tensions had required constant attention to the fundamental principles that had guided us from the beginning, that authentic relationships create more durable value than transactional exchanges, that leadership emerges from connection rather than domination, and that sustainable growth comes from depth rather than just expansion. After the panel concluded, a young entrepreneur approached me during the reception. "Your story has been my North Star," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "When my first company failed and investors told me my collaborative approach was too soft for the tech sector, I remembered how you transformed rejection into revolution." Her words touched me deeply. While the business impact of our work was measurable and significant, these human connections, these moments of shared understanding about what truly creates value, represented its most meaningful dimension. Later, that evening, I had dinner with Marcus, Elena, and Thomas at a small restaurant overlooking the Swiss Alps. The setting was breathtaking, snow-covered peaks illuminated by a brilliant moon, but the conversation was what truly nourished me. "I've been thinking about that January day," Thomas said, his voice reflective as he swirled a glass of wine. "The day Nathan let you go." I smiled. "I think about it often, too. With gratitude now, though that certainly wasn't my first reaction." He nodded. "I want to share something I've never told you. Something about that contract clause with Arcadia." Marcus and Elena exchanged knowing glances. "It wasn't my idea," Thomas continued. "I'd like to take credit for that strategic foresight, but the truth is, Marcus approached me about it when he first sensed the changing winds at Meridian." I turned to Marcus, surprised. "You initiated the clause?" He nodded. Elena and I could see what was happening as Thomas stepped back and Nathan stepped in. The cultural shift was palpable with each visit to Meridian's offices. We knew it was just a matter of time before the relationship-centered approach you embodied would collide with Nathan's transaction-focused vision. "So you created an insurance policy," I said, understanding dawning. "We created an opportunity," Elena corrected gently. "Not just for you, but for all of us who believed there was a better way to do business. The contract clause wasn't about protecting the past. It was about making space for the future." Thomas raised his glass. "To making space, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, for what truly matters to emerge." As we toasted under the alpine stars, I felt a profound sense of connectedness to these three individuals who had seen possibility where others had seen only problems. Their belief, their willingness to create structural support for an emerging vision, had been the catalyst for everything that followed. The next morning, a message arrived that I never expected to receive. Nathan Blackwell had reached out, through my assistant, requesting a brief meeting during the forum. He was in Davos representing his new venture capital firm focused on emerging markets. After a moment's reflection, I agreed, not from obligation or curiosity, but from a genuine belief that relationship-centered business applies even, perhaps especially, to difficult or wounded connections. We met in a quiet corner of the forum's networking lounge. Nathan looked different from the imperious executive who had fired me 3 years earlier. Still impeccably dressed, but somehow less rigid, the hard edges of his demeanor softened by time or experience or both. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his tone more genuine than I had ever heard from him. "I've been following the impact of your work. It's remarkable." "Thank you," I replied simply, neither defensive nor effusive. "What brings you to Davos?" "Officially? My fund is participating in discussions about sustainable development financing." "Unofficially?" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I wanted to witness firsthand what you've built. The relationship revolution is transforming how business is understood and practiced. Even in the venture capital world, perhaps, especially there, we're seeing the limits of purely transactional approaches." His acknowledgement was unexpected, but I sensed its authenticity. "The principles weren't new," I noted. "Thomas understood them decades ago. You saw them as outdated. We saw them as foundational." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's what I've come to understand. What I dismissed as soft or outdated was actually the essence of sustainable value creation. It just required a different framework than the one I was using." We talked for nearly an hour, not as former adversaries but as professionals with a shared interest in understanding how business creates lasting value. Nathan shared insights from his work in emerging markets, where relationship networks often determine success more directly than in developed economies. I shared observations from the Ascend Academy's global expansion. As our conversation concluded, Nathan said something that crystallized an important truth. Your success wasn't just in being right about relationship-centered business. It was in creating structures that allowed that truth to express itself at scale. The contract clause, Ascend's founding, the Bridge Initiative, the Academy, each step transformed principle into practice. His observation stayed with me throughout the remainder of the forum. The relationship-centered approach hadn't succeeded merely because it was philosophically sound, but because we had created organizational structures, measurement systems, and development pathways that embedded it in practical business operations. This realization informed my closing keynote on the forum's final day. Addressing the gathered leaders once more, I focused not on the why of relationship-centered business, but on the how, the practical infrastructure required to transform inspiration into institution. Enduring change requires more than compelling ideas, I explained. It demands systems that sustain those ideas beyond individual champions or isolated initiatives. The relationship revolution has gained momentum not just because its principles resonate, but because we've developed concrete methods for implementing them across diverse organizational contexts. I outlined the key structural elements we had developed through Ascend and the Bridge Initiative. Relationship-centered metrics that measured depth and quality alongside traditional performance indicators, governance systems that balanced stakeholder interests rather than privileging any single group, talent development approaches that valued connection competencies as highly as technical skills. The future of business isn't just about adopting relationship-centered principles, I concluded. It's about redesigning our organizations to embody those principles in every dimension, from how we make decisions to how we develop leaders, from how we measure success to how we structure rewards. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just affirmation of a presentation. It was recognition of a transformative vision that had moved from the margins to the mainstream of global business thinking. What had begun in that moment of rejection 3 years earlier had evolved into a movement reshaping how value creation itself was understood. Following the forum, I took a rare vacation, a week at a small villa on Italy's Amalfi Coast. The solitude gave me space to reflect on both the journey behind and the path ahead. Sitting on the terrace one evening, watching the Mediterranean sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I opened my journal and began to write. 3 years ago today, I believed my professional story had reached its end. In that moment of rejection, I couldn't see the beginning it actually represented. The closed door that seemed like confinement was actually an opening to a far greater purpose than I had previously imagined. The lesson I keep learning is that our greatest contributions often emerge from our deepest challenges, not despite them, but because of them. Nathan's dismissal of my approach created the very conditions that allowed that approach to prove its value more definitively than would have otherwise been possible. The question now is, what's next? The relationship revolution has gained momentum, but transformative movements require constant renewal to avoid becoming rigid orthodoxies. How do we ensure that relationship-centered business evolves as contexts change while remaining true to its foundational insights? The question lingered as I returned to Chicago the following week. Ascend had grown from a small startup to a global organization with over 300 employees across offices in Chicago, London, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. The Bridge Initiative now encompassed strategic partnerships with 12 major firms beyond Meridian. The Ascend Academy had trained leaders from more than 4,000 organizations worldwide. This growth brought new challenges, maintaining authentic connection across a dispersed organization, ensuring consistent quality in our expanding programs, balancing innovation with coherence as our approach evolved. Leading this ecosystem required different skills and structures than founding a boutique consultancy had demanded. One morning, shortly after my return, I invited Olivia, now Ascend's president and my closest strategic partner, to join me for a walk along Lake Michigan. The late spring air was fresh, sunlight dancing on the water as joggers and cyclists moved along the shoreline path. "I've been thinking about succession," I said as we walked. "Not immediate transition, but intentional preparation for Ascend's future leadership." Olivia looked surprised. "You're not planning to leave, are you?" I smiled. "Not at all. But the founder shouldn't be the limiter of an organization's evolution. If relationship-centered business is to truly transform how value is created globally, it can't depend on any single leader or personality. "What are you envisioning?" she asked thoughtfully. "A distributed leadership model," I explained. "One that embodies relationship-centered principles in its very structure. Not a traditional hierarchy with power concentrated at the top, but a network of empowered leaders connected through shared purpose and values." Over the following months, we developed what came to be called the Constellation Model, a leadership approach in which authority was distributed across the organization according to purpose and capability rather than position or tenure. The model incorporated structured mentorship pathways, ensuring knowledge transfer across experience levels, and collaborative decision frameworks that leveraged diverse perspectives. 6 months after our lakeside conversation, we formally implemented the Constellation Model across Ascend's global operations. Rather than traditional department heads reporting to a centralized executive team, we created purpose-centered teams with designated connectors who facilitated collaboration across organizational boundaries. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some team members accustomed to clear hierarchical structures struggled with the more fluid arrangements. Others embraced the increased autonomy, but needed support in developing the relationship competencies required for effective collaboration. Throughout this evolution, I found myself returning to the compass Thomas had given me years earlier, the physical reminder to maintain clear direction while adapting to changing landscapes. The structure of our organization was transforming, but our true north remained constant. The belief that authentic relationships create more sustainable value than transactional exchanges. 1 year after implementing the Constellation Model, we gathered Ascend's global team for a 3-day summit in Chicago. Leaders from across our organization shared insights from the model's implementation in different cultural contexts, honest, about both successes and challenges encountered along the way. "What we're learning," observed Mei Lin, our Singapore-based connector, "is that relationship-centered business looks different across cultural contexts. The fundamental principles remain constant, but how they express themselves varies widely. Our task isn't standardization but thoughtful adaptation." Her insight crystallized something I had been sensing but hadn't fully articulated. The next evolution of the relationship revolution would be cultural adaptation rather than just organizational expansion. Not diluting our core principles, but expressing them in ways that resonated authentically across diverse contexts. This realization led to the launch of the Cultural Adaptation Initiative, a focused effort to understand how relationship-centered business principles manifested in different regional, sectoral, and organizational cultures. Rather than deploying a standardized approach globally, we began developing culturally responsive frameworks that honored local traditions while advancing universal principles. The initiative yielded remarkable insights. In East Asian contexts, relationship-centered business aligned naturally with long-standing traditions emphasizing harmony and long-term orientation, but required adaptation to hierarchical expectations. In Nordic environments, the approach resonated with egalitarian values, but needed to address cultural preferences for personal space and emotional reserve. These learnings became the foundation for the next generation of Ascend Academy programs. Culturally, adaptive pathways that maintained consistent principles while honoring diverse expressions. The approach accelerated adoption globally, as leaders recognized that relationship-centered business wasn't a Western imposition, but a universal framework, adaptable to local contexts. 5 years to the day after Nathan fired me, I received an email that brought the journey full circle. The board of directors at Meridian Consulting, now fully transformed through its partnership with Ascend, was establishing the Jensen Fellowship for Relationship-Centered Leadership, a funded program to develop emerging leaders committed to this approach. Victoria's message explained, "The fellowship honors not just what you've built, but how you've built it, with integrity, vision, and unwavering commitment to the belief that business works better when relationships come first. Each year, 10 promising leaders will receive mentorship, education, and practical experience in relationship-centered principles, ensuring this approach continues evolving for generations to come. The news touched me deeply, not for the personal recognition, but for what it represented about the institutionalization of relationship-centered business. What had begun as an individual approach, dismissed and devalued by those who couldn't see its potential, had evolved into a structural legacy that would continue beyond any single leader or organization. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home for those who had been part of the journey from its earliest days: Marcus and Elena, Thomas, Olivia, and Victoria. As we shared memories and insights from the past 5 years, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. To Rebecca, he began, who transformed professional rejection into global revolution, who showed us that leadership isn't about position or power, but about perceiving possibilities others miss and creating conditions for them to flourish. I felt a wave of gratitude for these individuals who had believed in the vision when it was still just that, a vision not yet validated by market success or global recognition. Their belief had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved. But this was never about me. It was about an idea whose time had come. That business works better when we value depth over just speed, connection over just transaction, relationship over just results. I was just fortunate enough to be in the right position, at the right moment, to help that idea find expression. With the right preparation, Thomas added with a knowing smile. Ideas don't manifest themselves. They require people courageous enough to embody them, especially when conventional wisdom points in the opposite direction. As the evening continued, conversation turned naturally to the future, to emerging applications of relationship-centered principles in artificial intelligence ethics, climate adaptation strategies, and cross-sector collaboration frameworks. The approach that Nathan had dismissed as outdated was proving remarkably adaptive to the most complex challenges of our time. Late that night, after my guests had departed, I stood on my balcony overlooking Chicago's skyline. The city lights reflected on Lake Michigan's dark surface, creating constellations that mirrored the starry sky above. The symmetry seemed fitting, a visual representation of the principle that had guided this entire journey, that patterns of connection create structures of enduring value. I thought about that January day 5 years earlier, how devastated I had felt walking out of Meridian's offices with my career seemingly in shambles. The pain had been real, the uncertainty genuine. Yet that moment of professional rejection had contained within it the seeds of everything that followed. Not because rejection itself is valuable, but because it sometimes creates space for deeper authenticity to emerge. Not because failure is inherently beneficial, but because it occasionally clears the path for more aligned success. Not because loss is desirable, but because it sometimes reveals possibilities previously obscured by comfort or convention. The most profound lesson of these 5 years wasn't about business strategy or organizational design, though those had been transformed as well. It was about the nature of contribution itself, that our greatest impact often emerges from moments when the paths we thought we should be walking are suddenly closed, forcing us to forge new ones aligned with deeper truths. Nathan Blackwell had fired me believing he was eliminating an outdated approach that limited Meridian's growth. Instead, he had catalyzed a movement that was redefining how business value is understood and created globally. The very qualities he had dismissed, relationship depth, patient development, authentic connection, had proven to be not just soft attributes, but the foundations of sustainable competitive advantage. As I turned to go inside, my phone chimed with a message from a former client now implementing relationship-centered principles in his manufacturing organization. "Just wanted you to know," we've transformed not just our processes but our purpose through this approach. Thank you for showing us that business can be both more human and more effective simultaneously. His words captured the essence of what we had built together. Not just more successful organizations, but more meaningful ones. Not just better results, but better relationships. Not just sustainable profits, but sustainable purpose. The journey, from fired executive to global thought leader, hadn't been about personal vindication, but about validating a vision that transcended any individual career. The true measure of success wasn't that I had proven Nathan wrong, but that we had proven relationship-centered business right. Not through argument, but through impact. Sometimes our greatest setbacks contain our greatest opportunities. Sometimes closed doors lead to open roads. And sometimes, being underestimated is the very catalyst that allows us to demonstrate just how much is possible when we lead from authentic relationship rather than positional authority. The relationship revolution continued unfolding, evolving, in ways I couldn't have imagined on that January day when everything seemed to end. But that apparent ending had been merely the first step in a much more meaningful beginning, one that continued expanding its impact with each leader who discovered the transformative power of putting relationships at the center of how we create value together. Epilogue. Legacy. 10 years after that cold January day when Nathan Blackwell fired me, I stood on the roof garden of Ascend's global headquarters in Chicago. The space had been designed as a living embodiment of our philosophy, a harmonious ecosystem where different elements supported each other's growth rather than competing for dominance. Native wildflowers grew alongside cultivated roses, fruit-bearing trees provided shade for community vegetable beds, and water features collected rainwater that nourished the entire system. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to gild the Chicago skyline. I had always been an early riser, but these quiet moments before the building filled with activity had become especially precious as my role evolved from founder to what we now called vision steward, a position focused on guiding Ascend's future direction while empowering others to lead its day-to-day operations. The door opened behind me, and Olivia joined me at the railing. Her hair now had elegant streaks of silver, but her energy remained as vibrant as when we'd first launched Ascend a decade earlier. "The teams are arriving," she said. "Are you ready for today?" I nodded, taking a final moment to appreciate the peaceful cityscape. 10 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime entirely. She smiled. Both can be true simultaneously. Today marked the 10th anniversary of Ascend's founding, and we had planned not a celebration of the past, but a summit focused on the future. Leaders from 6 continents had gathered in Chicago to participate in what we called the Next Horizon, a 3-day exploration of how relationship-centered business would evolve over the coming decade. As we made our way downstairs, the building was coming alive with activity. What had begun as a small team of true believers had grown into a global community of over 800 professionals across 23 offices. Yet despite this growth, we had maintained the intimate culture that distinguished Ascend from traditional consulting firms. The constellation model had evolved into what we now called organic leadership, a framework that allowed authority to flow naturally to those best positioned to exercise it in any given situation. The main conference center was already filled with animated conversation when we arrived. I spotted familiar faces from across our journey, clients who had become partners, competitors who had become collaborators, skeptics who had become advocates. The diversity was striking, not just geographical and cultural diversity, but diversity of perspective, experience, and approach, all united by commitment to relationship-centered principles. Lisa Chen, now Ascend's executive director after joining us from a major technology firm 5 years earlier, approached with a warm smile. "The panel moderators are all prepared. We have representatives from 11 industries ready to share their applications of relationship-centered methodology." I thanked her, marveling silently at how thoroughly our approach had permeated sectors that once seemed impenetrable. From financial services to manufacturing, from healthcare to education, from government to technology. What had begun as a philosophy dismissed as too soft for serious business had proven its concrete value across contexts that couldn't be more different. As I moved through the gathering toward the main stage, I was stopped by a young woman I didn't recognize. "Ms. Jensen," she began, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "I'm Zara Patel, this year's recipient of the Jensen Fellowship at Meridian." I smiled warmly. "It's wonderful to meet you, Zara. How are you finding the program?" "Life-changing," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "But I wanted to tell you something specific. My mother worked at Meridian when you were fired 10 years ago. She was in accounting. Rachel Patel." The name triggered an immediate memory. A kind woman who had always made time to explain financial concepts I didn't understand, who had brought homemade chai to late-night planning sessions. "I remember your mother well," I said. "She was extraordinarily capable and genuinely kind. A rare combination in corporate finance." Zara nodded eagerly. "She tells the story of what happened after you left, how Meridian struggled, how the atmosphere changed, how she almost left herself, and then how everything transformed when the Bridge Initiative began. She says watching that journey is what inspired me to pursue business in the first place, seeing that it could be both effective and humane simultaneously." Her words touched me deeply. The ripple effects of our work had extended far beyond metrics and methodologies to shape individual lives and career paths in ways I couldn't have anticipated. "That means more to me than you know," I told her. "The true measure of what we've built isn't in organizational structures or financial results, but in how it's changed what people believe is possible." The conversation was interrupted by the announcement that our opening session would begin in 5 minutes. As attendees made their way to their seats, I moved toward the stage where Thomas Mercer was already waiting. Now in his 80s, he had remained a guiding presence in our work, his wisdom deepening rather than diminishing with age. "Nervous?" he asked with a knowing smile as I joined him backstage. "Not nervous," I clarified, "just aware of the significance. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined we'd be here, with relationship-centered business recognized as a legitimate discipline taught in business schools worldwide." He nodded. "That's the nature of true innovation. It seems impossible until it becomes inevitable. What you've built has that quality. Once people experience it, they wonder how we ever operated differently." The lights dimmed, signaling the beginning of the program. Thomas squeezed my hand gently. "Remember," he said, "today isn't just about celebrating the past. It's about seeding the future." I walked onto the stage to warm applause, the faces before me representing the extraordinary community that had formed around our shared vision. The giant screens behind me displayed a simple phrase: "The next horizon, relationship-centered business, 2030. 10 years ago today," I began. I was sitting in my apartment with a cardboard box of office belongings, trying to make sense of having been fired after a decade of service. What I couldn't see then, what none of us can see in moments of profound disruption, is that endings often contain beginnings of far greater significance than we can imagine. The audience was silent, attentive, some nodding in recognition of their own journeys through professional challenge. That moment of rejection catalyzed what we now call the relationship revolution, not because rejection itself is valuable, but because it sometimes creates space for deeper truths to emerge and find expression, not because failure is inherently beneficial, but because it occasionally reveals possibilities previously hidden by comfort or convention. I advanced the presentation to display a world map illuminated with points of light representing the global reach of relationship-centered methodology. Today, over 47,000 organizations across 134 countries have adopted these principles, adapting them to diverse cultural contexts while maintaining their essential truth: that authentic relationships, create more sustainable value than transactional exchanges. The data was compelling, but as always, the human impact was more powerful. I invited to the stage a series of speakers who shared how relationship-centered business had transformed their organizations and sectors. A hospital network that had reduced patient mortality by 32% through relationship-focused care protocols. A manufacturing consortium that had maintained profitability while achieving carbon-neutral operations through collaborative innovation. A school system that had dramatically improved outcomes by prioritizing relationship quality in both teaching and administration. Each story illuminated different facets of the approach, but all shared a common thread: the recognition that relationship quality wasn't just a nice-to-have social dimension, but the fundamental infrastructure of sustainable success. After these presentations, I returned to the stage to introduce the summit's central focus. What we've accomplished together over these 10 years has validated relationship-centered business, not just as philosophy, but as practice. Now we must ask, what's next? How does this approach evolve to address the complex challenges of the coming decade? I outlined the emerging frontiers we would explore over the next 3 days: the application of relationship-centered principles to artificial intelligence ethics, climate adaptation strategies, intergenerational collaboration frameworks, and cross-cultural governance systems, not expanding our approach through mere growth, but deepening it through thoughtful adaptation to emerging contexts. The future of business isn't just about adopting relationship-centered principles, I concluded. It's about evolving them responsibly, as the world itself transforms. That evolution requires your wisdom, your experience, your insight. The next horizon isn't something we predict. It's something we create together. As the opening session transitioned to collaborative workshops, I stepped backstage where Marcus and Elena were waiting. Now in their 60s but still actively involved in Arcadia's leadership and Ascend's guidance, they had remained steadfast allies throughout our journey. "Magnificent opening," Elena said warmly. "You've framed exactly the right questions for the summit to explore." "It's extraordinary to see how far we've come," Marcus added, "from a crisis response to a global movement in just 10 years. I smiled, thinking of how their early belief in me, their willingness to create structural support for a vision others dismissed, had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. None of this would have existed without your courage. In that first moment, I acknowledged, when you showed me the contract clause and proposed Ascend, you were betting on something that existed only as potential." "The best investments always are," Marcus replied with characteristic insight. "Not in what already exists, but in what could exist given the right conditions." Throughout the day, I moved between workshops and discussion groups, more as participant than leader. One of the most significant evolutions in our approach had been the shift from centralized authority to distributed wisdom, recognizing that the next horizon would emerge from collective intelligence rather than individual vision. In a session on artificial intelligence ethics, a fascinating debate emerged about how relationship-centered principles should guide the development of increasingly autonomous systems. A technologist from Seoul argued passionately for embedding relationship values directly into algorithmic architecture, while a philosopher from Lagos made a compelling case for maintaining human relationship oversight rather than delegating ethical judgments to systems. The depth and nuance of the conversation exemplified how our approach had matured beyond its initial applications. Relationship-centered business wasn't just a methodology for human interaction. It had become a framework for addressing complex, systemic challenges across technological, ecological, and social dimensions. That evening, we hosted a dinner for summit participants on the lakefront campus of the Relationship Institute, the research and education center we had established 5 years earlier to advance the academic foundation of our work. The setting sun painted Lake Michigan in shades of gold and crimson as guests gathered on the terraced lawn. Victoria Blackwell, now serving as Chancellor of the Institute after her successful tenure as Meridian's CEO, welcomed attendees with characteristic grace. Under her leadership, the Institute had become a globally respected center for research on relationship dynamics in business, producing peer-reviewed studies that had firmly established the measurable impact of our approach. What began as innovative practice has evolved into rigorous discipline, she noted in her remarks. The relationship revolution wasn't just a market response, but a fundamental shift in how we understand value creation itself. As dinner concluded, Thomas Mercer rose to offer a toast. Despite his advanced age, his voice carried clearly across the gathering. 10 years ago, when Rebecca first described her vision for Ascend, I gave her a compass inscribed with the words, True North. It was a reminder that while paths may change, direction remains constant. He raised his glass. To all who have helped navigate this journey, who have maintained clear direction while adapting to changing landscapes, and especially to Rebecca, who transformed professional rejection into global revolution, not through force of will, but through depth of belief. The warmth of recognition flowing through the gathering touched me deeply. Yet even in this moment of celebration, I felt an awareness that our work was still unfolding, still evolving in response to a world that continued to reveal new complexities and possibilities. Later that night, walking alone along the lakeshore path, I reflected on the extraordinary decade that had passed since Nathan Blackwell had summoned me to his office that January morning. The journey from fired executive to global thought leader hadn't followed any path I could have anticipated or designed. Its power lay precisely in how it had emerged organically from authentic response to circumstance rather than from calculated strategy. The next morning, before rejoining the summit, I made an unscheduled visit to Meridian's headquarters, the building from which I had been escorted 10 years earlier with my career seemingly in shambles. Though our organizations had been partners for years through the Bridge Initiative, I rarely visited the physical space where my professional identity had been so profoundly challenged. The lobby had been redesigned, more open and welcoming than the imposing marble expanse I remembered. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Ms. Jensen, we weren't expecting you today." "Just a brief personal visit," I explained. "Is the 10th floor conference room available for a few minutes?" She checked the system. "It's open until 9. Would you like me to reserve it for you?" I nodded, thanking her as I made my way to the elevators. The 10th floor conference room had been where Nathan had first outlined his vision for Meridian's future, the transaction-focused approach that had ultimately led to my dismissal. It seemed fitting to visit that space on this anniversary. The room itself had changed considerably, now designed for collaborative work rather than hierarchical presentations, with flexible seating arrangements and interactive technology. But the view remained the same. Chicago's skyline stretched out beyond the windows, a combination of historic architecture and modern innovation that mirrored what we had created through the Bridge Initiative. I stood by the windows, remembering the sense of isolation I had felt a decade earlier when Nathan's vision had so directly contradicted my own understanding of what created sustainable business value. The loneliness of that position, of holding convictions that others in power dismissed or devalued, had been profound. Yet that very isolation had pushed me to articulate my approach more clearly, to test it more rigorously, to build structures that could sustain it beyond any single advocate. The resistance hadn't weakened my vision. It had strengthened it, forced it to prove its value beyond doubt or dismissal. A knock at the door interrupted my reflection. Victoria entered with 2 cups of coffee. "The receptionist mentioned you." "We're here," she explained, offering me one of the cups. "I thought you might welcome company." We sat by the windows, the morning sun warming the room. "I was just thinking about the meeting where Nathan first outlined his vision for Meridian," I admitted. "It was in this room, though it looked very different then." Victoria nodded. "I remember. He was so certain of his approach, so dismissive of alternatives." That certainty seemed powerful at the time, I reflected. Now it seems like such a limitation. The inability to see value in perspectives different from his own. That's perhaps the most profound aspect of what you've built, Victoria observed. Not just a different approach to business, but a different understanding of leadership itself, one that draws strength from diverse perspectives rather than from singular conviction. Her insight crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. The relationship revolution hadn't just transformed how organizations engaged with clients and employees. It had fundamentally redefined how we understood leadership, not as positional authority or charismatic dominance, but as the capacity to create conditions where authentic connection could flourish. "What do you think Nathan would make of all this?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective given their former marriage. Victoria considered the question thoughtfully. "I think he would recognize the market validation but still struggle with the underlying philosophy. Some people can acknowledge results without embracing the principles that produce them." She glanced at her watch. "The summit's morning session begins soon. Shall we head over together?" As we left Meridian's building and walked toward the Relationship Institute where the summit was being held, Victoria shared news I hadn't heard. The board voted yesterday to formally rename the company. As of next quarter, Meridian Consulting will become Meridian Connections. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was meaningful, a public acknowledgement of the transformation that had occurred over the past decade. "That's a significant change for an established brand," I noted. "It reflects the reality of what we've become," Victoria replied. "Not just through the Bridge Initiative, but through the fundamental shift in how we understand our purpose. We're not merely consultants delivering expertise. We're connectors facilitating transformation through relationship." Her words echoed as we rejoined the summit, where the day's sessions focused on practical applications of relationship-centered principles to emerging challenges. The energy was palpable, not the frenetic intensity of transaction-focused environments, but the generative engagement that emerges when people connect around shared purpose. During the lunch break, I received an unexpected message, an email from Nathan Blackwell himself. We had occasionally encountered each other at international business events over the years, our interactions cordial but limited. His message was brief but striking. "Rebecca, I've been following the coverage of your 10th anniversary summit from Singapore. The global impact of what you've built is undeniable. While I still believe transaction efficiency drives initial growth, I've come to recognize that relationship depth sustains it. My current ventures incorporate elements of your approach, adapted to Asian markets. Different paths, perhaps, but no longer entirely opposed ones. Congratulations on a decade of profound influence. Nathan." His acknowledgement wasn't necessary. For validation, the market had long since confirmed the value of relationship-centered business. But it represented something meaningful nonetheless, the capacity for even deeply held perspectives to evolve when confronted with compelling evidence. I shared the message with Thomas during a quiet moment between sessions. He smiled, unsurprised. The truth has a way of making itself known, even to those most resistant to it. Not all at once, rarely with fanfare, but persistently, through results that can't be explained by previous frameworks. The summit's final day focused on collective visioning, collaborative exploration of how relationship-centered business would evolve over the coming decade. The methodology was characteristically inclusive, drawing insights from participants at all levels and across all sectors, rather than privileging established voices. As the process unfolded, clear themes emerged. The need for relationship-centered approaches to global challenges like climate adaptation and resource distribution. The application of our principles to emerging technologies to ensure they enhanced, rather than diminished, human connection. The development of governance systems that balanced efficiency with meaningful engagement across cultural boundaries. For the closing session, I invited representatives from each working group to share their insights rather than centralizing the summary myself. This wasn't performative humility, but practical wisdom, the recognition that the next horizon would emerge from collective intelligence rather than individual vision, no matter how inspired. As the summit concluded, participants departed not with a predefined roadmap, but with a shared direction, a true north that would guide their individual and organizational journeys while allowing for diverse paths toward common purpose. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my home for those who had been part of our journey from its earliest days: Marcus and Elena, Thomas, Olivia, Victoria, and a few others who had believed in the vision when it existed only as potential. The conversation flowed naturally between reflection on the past and anticipation of the future, between personal stories and professional insights. As the night deepened, Thomas raised his glass in a final toast. 10 years ago, a door closed, he began. A career ended. A vision was dismissed. But in that apparent ending, something extraordinary began. Not just a successful enterprise or a validated approach, but a fundamental reimagining of how business creates value and how leadership facilitates connection. He turned to me with deep appreciation in his eyes. Rebecca showed us that our greatest contributions often emerge not from uninterrupted ascent, but from meaningful disruption. Not from paths of least resistance, but from journeys that require us to articulate and embody our deepest convictions, especially when they're challenged or dismissed. His words resonated deeply with everyone present, each having experienced their own version of that truth throughout our shared journey. As the gathering gradually dispersed into the quiet Chicago night, I found myself once more on my balcony, gazing at the city lights reflecting on Lake Michigan's dark surface. 10 years ago, I had stood devastated in Meridian's lobby, a cardboard box of office belongings in my arms, my professional identity shattered by Nathan's dismissal. That moment had felt like an ending, the collapse of everything I had worked to build over a decade of dedicated service. Yet that apparent ending had contained within it the seeds of a beginning far more significant than anything I could have created had my career at Meridian continued uninterrupted. The very qualities Nathan had dismissed as weaknesses, relationship, focus, collaborative orientation, patient development, had proven to be not just strengths but the foundations of sustainable competitive advantage and meaningful impact. The lesson that continued to deepen with each passing year wasn't about business strategy or organizational design, though those had been transformed as well. It was about the nature of contribution itself, that our greatest impact often emerges from moments when the paths we thought we should be walking are suddenly closed, forcing us to forge new ones aligned with deeper truths. Sometimes professional rejection contains the catalyst for revolutionary creation. Sometimes closed doors lead to open horizons. And sometimes being underestimated is the very circumstance that allows us to demonstrate what's truly possible, when we lead from authentic connection rather than positional authority. As I turned to go inside, I caught sight of Thomas's compass on my desk, the words "True North" still clearly visible on its surface despite years of handling. The paths had changed dramatically over the past decade, from fired executive to founder, from startup to global movement, from innovative practice to established discipline. But the direction had remained constant throughout. The belief that authentic relationships create more sustainable value than transactional exchanges. That belief, once dismissed as outdated by those who couldn't see its relevance to modern business challenges, had proven to be not just timeless, but increasingly essential as organizations navigated complex interdependencies across technological, ecological, and social dimensions. What had begun as a personal conviction had evolved into a global movement, not because it was new, but because it was fundamentally true, aligning with how humans naturally create value together when artificial constraints are removed. The true legacy of the past decade wasn't ascend as an organization, influential as it had become, or relationship-centered business as a methodology, valuable as it had proven to be. It was the fundamental shift in how we understood leadership itself, not as position or power, but as the capacity to create conditions where authentic connection could flourish and collective wisdom could emerge. That shift would continue evolving long after any single organization or approach, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential truth: that the quality of our connections determines the quality of our outcomes. That relationship depth creates resilience that transaction speed cannot match, and that the most sustainable value emerges not from domination, but from genuine collaboration. 10 years after being fired, I understood with profound clarity that what had appeared to be professional rejection had actually been invitation to articulate more clearly what I truly believed, to build more intentionally what I truly valued, and to demonstrate more definitively what was truly possible. The journey continued unfolding, evolving in ways I couldn't predict or control. But the compass remained steady, pointing always toward that true north: the recognition that authentic relationships create the foundation for everything else that matters, in business and beyond. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.